right. Welcome to episode 2 of Tea Time. Today, we have my good friend Rob, who is our first guest on today's production. As was discussed in my last episode, the second episode weekly will deal with the topic that I essentially just want to help provide you, my audience, with information that can help them. Maybe you seeing things in the news and you're kind of questioning them, and you want to know, is this truly accurate? That's essentially my role here, is to try to help out with that. To start with, Rob, why don't you talk a little bit about your background, what you went to school for, and just kind of general gist of how that has kind of transformed the way you look at things now.
Sure. So after graduating high school, I had intention on going to medical school to become a doctor. I had a couple specialties in mind. Um, I went a different path as I was in college and realized that GPA is a lot more important than I thought it would be. Essentially, 3.5 or above, that's the doctor range. I was at the 3.3, looked a little risky. So I switched majors to topics that I felt were more relevant to me and more interesting in that time. And for me, that was mostly psychology and philosophy classes. But my degree is in psychology, so I do have a bachelor's in psych. I've worked a little bit in research within that field. I would like to get more experience myself in that domain. But aside from educational background, I've had many experiences in entry level industries, fast food, family dining, retail. I've worked with management myself, and in this past year and a half, I gained a lot of management experience, and I'm hoping to grow that a little bit more to make me more versatile in this marketplace.
Awesome. This episode, we're going to be focusing on the concept of despair and victimhood. Specifically, with dealing with minorities and women economically and in the workplace. Depending on which news you watch, we all know that Fox News and CNN are the two most popular. Both, though, really aren't great to watch because Fox News is heavily conservative, Republican based, and CNN is heavily liberal, Democratic based. So both of these channels are going to have a slant. So, me personally, just my opinion, MSNBC, um, BBC News, your local news in your general area. These stations are going to be more along the lines of just giving you facts, just telling you what's happening, versus all of the op-ed. But as I digress, essentially, we hear a lot that black people in America tend to have had this systemic despair that they're not doing well, and that it's because of a white patriarchal system that blacks, Hispanics, and women do not succeed or have the same type of wealth that their white male counterparts have. The other narrative that you hear is that that's not true. It's 2021. Everybody's fine. There's no need to be concerned about equity or need to be concerned about wealth equality because we're fine. So, if you have any intelligence, you probably know that both of those different sides of the aisle sound exaggerated and ridiculous. Which brings me to some stats that we're going to kind of break down twice. So, all of these stats, because again, I'm about facts, not emotion. These are all from census.gov and Pew Research. So, you can Google census.gov and Pew Research on your own. It'll take you right to these government websites. You see that they're real numbers that were broken down by statisticians. So the median income for black households in 2009 to 2009, I'm sorry, 2007 to 2019. So in '07 it was 41,922. In 2019 it was 45,438. For Hispanics in 2007, it was 47,809, and in 2019, it was 56,113.
Well, it went up higher.
Yeah. And then for whites, 62,007 and 68,145 in 19. So as Rob brought out, we see first off that everybody's increasing. Nobody is going down or staying stagnant. However, as you can see, you do see that curve of whites at 68 plus, Hispanics at 56 plus, and then blacks at 45 plus. So that's according to census.gov. But as the saying goes, numbers don't lie, but they also don't tell the whole story. So this statistic I want to get into with Rob, to kind of link it to his psych background. But this deals with essentially children and their family demographic. So 74.3% of white children grow up with both parents in their household. 38.7% black children grow up with both parents in their household. So 1/3 of black children in general live with an unmarried mom. And what's interesting is going back to those median income statistics, Asians actually have the highest out of everybody. Their median income is over 80,000, and that corresponds with 85% of Asians live with married parents. So as we can see, the first statistic that you may hear on certain news outlets, yeah, it's not wrong that they say that blacks and Hispanics make less. But one could argue that these statistics, when it deals with growing up in a single parent home, plays a big role in that. So, Rob, just from your background, what are the impacts on children when there's no father figure or if there's just a single parent in the household?
Sure. So I will give a little caveat that I didn't specialize in child development, but I can use some of general psych to assist with that. So essentially, you need a variety of things from your parents in reference to how they're raising you, what values that they're instilling in you as a person, and one person to ask them to get everything that an individual needs to succeed in this life, it is asking a lot, and sometimes just focusing on trying to keep the roof over the house and food on the table, it's difficult alone in that, and if they're not receiving any help from any other relatives or friends, then it is a very daunting task. In a married couple, they're more likely to be able to bounce off of each other. So some days might not be the best for dad, some days might not be the best for mom, and they can rotate. So there's some help there. It gives them their own mental health sick day, if you will. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, you don't need a degree, a doctorate in, adolescent or pediatric behavior to understand the point that if you have one parent that's struggling, because if you think about it, let's say you have a mom and a dad who are both making 50,000 a year, that automatically boosts the median household income. Well, the specific income for that household up to 100,000. There's a lot more you can do for your kid with 100,000 a year versus, let's say you have a single mom. A lot of women and women of color and low-income neighborhoods usually do things along the healthcare avenue as far as being an LPN or a CN. So or CNA rather. So when you think about that, those jobs typically only pay you about 17,000 to 25, 30,000 a year. So that obviously creates a big struggle. So the reason why I think numbers like these are important is because it's the equivalent of when we look at politics today. I liken it to if you have a home and you notice that there's a lot of spots of dirt that are piling up on your floor. You're not going to just go to the store and buy more brooms and mops because every day you see these spots of dirt. you're going to figure out what the root cause of that dirt is, whether it's telling your kids to stop walking in the home with their shoes and boots on, or you choose to have a different setup for your pets entering after going out to your backyard and they're all muddy. You're going to try to help fix the problem. And I think, in our society today, we just see.
Well, can I sweep it under the rug?
Right. Yeah. And the problem with it too, I think, has a lot to do with our cancel culture and being politically correct. You know, if you talk to most individuals who will bring up numbers like this, you usually will get deflected to, you're victim blaming, or you're putting it on women, or you're racist, or for me being black, some may say that, I'm a sellout, just because of the fact that I'm highlighting a piece that's saying that the numbers by themselves don't necessarily per se tell the whole story.
Of course. I actually saw a meme of Doc Rivers the other day, and he was emphasizing how valuable a player Ben Simmons is, and numbers don't equate to that value.
Right. Yeah, I mean, even when you look at football, you could have a quarterback who is having trouble in the end zone, but he gets his team, down the field just enough to give their defense a rest to keep their team in a close game. Just because they may only have gotten one touchdown doesn't mean that they weren't productive. So there's other stats that you have to look at. So for me, going back to the whole purpose of this channel is to not only present facts, but then find a way to practically try to help the problem. So, in your opinion, what are some ways in which we can further, bridge that gap between wealth between the races in America?
Now, I have heard of communities of specific race groups that loan each other money. I think it's they pool together their money so that one is able to open a store or a business of some sort, and they all support that person. And then when that business gets built up and they have revenue to be able to invest in the other people that were patient enough to use their resources to help out the one who went first. And then over the period of their lives, all of them are able to get their businesses. My suggestion would probably be community development. Now, it doesn't necessarily need to be birds of the feather flock together and everyone still separates among races, but as long as you have the core of, like Tilden said, of uniting for a common cause, having people that are rooting for you to be the best person that you want to be, and in return, you are also supporting them.
Yeah, I think that's great. I know for a while I drove for Uber, and I picked up a professor from one of the universities in Buffalo, New York, and he was a little concerned when Trump had first got elected because a lot of Indian immigrants were slowing down on signing up for different doctorate programs and the UB medical school out of fear. But he went on to further tell me that in their entire villages, a lot of times in India, they'll save up money just to send one kid to school. So obviously, one could argue that no matter how poor the town, there aren't very many towns in the United States that have the same level of economic despair as a small village in India. But the principle of that is just working together. I think when you look at a lot of immigrant communities, whether it be different West African communities or different Middle Eastern communities, typically they're all working together to pull themselves up. And you don't really see that in a lot of, traditional urban, hoods, that we see. You see it, a lot of violence, gang violence, illicit drug use. And again, we're not, in this, I want to be clear, we're not blaming these communities is saying that it's their own fault. Obviously, being a man of color myself, I grew up, in that type of environment, and then my dad was able to eventually move us to the suburbs. But I think about something fascinating is on Netflix there was that documentary about crack and how the United States essentially either looked the other way or facilitated.
So we didn't declare war on it?
Not at that time.
Okay.
Um, I forget the name of the group, but there was a group in a South American country, and they essentially were stopping communism in this particular country because at that time, under the first Bush, it was anti-communist. So they essentially would arm this group to fight and essentially do a coup d'état, and in exchange for that, allow their drug lords to smuggle in more cocaine into the United States. So once you had all this cocaine, you could strip it of certain properties and smoke it, aka crack.
Yeah.
And if you're a student of history, you know what the crack epidemic did to black neighborhoods, throughout the United States.
Completely devastated.
Right. And then once they did decide to do this failed war on drugs, it took a lot of black men off the streets and in jail, which contributes to this, percentage of black kids that grow up without a father. So essentially, you start penalizing the users and not the sellers. When you see in a lot of Nordic countries, it's treated as a healthcare issue, not a criminal issue.
So there's some rehabilitation in other countries that the United States probably should be taking some notes on.
Exactly. We still have a very archaic, purist mindset as a nation when it comes to a lot of issues. You mind passing me my beer over there? I forgot. I'm not sponsored yet, but Resurgence beer, best beer in Buffalo. Although I'm not drinking Resurgence beer, it's just a cup. What beer did you bring?
This is by Nightmare Brewery. They are a craft brewer based in New York, I believe, or maybe that's Connecticut. North Haven. If you guys know where North Haven is, you'll know what state it is. But the interesting thing about Nightmare, a little side thought, is the art on the can is a little gruesome. So yeah. But it is a 15%, so drink responsibly.
Good stuff. So I think at this point we can say two things. Number one, numbers don't lie. There's typically other numbers that can assist. But then third is that just because those numbers don't lie doesn't mean that we can then all of a sudden just say that blacks and Hispanics, it's their fault that they're poor. There's a lot of external factors from the United States horrible past on with drugs to elements of Jim Crow, that have been external factors to contribute to some of the wealth inequality that we see in the United States. So really the biggest takeaway that I think that we all can get from this is that it's complex, it's not simple. So with that being said, shout out to Jordan Peterson. If you're watching this video one day, hopefully we can connect. But
we'll have him on the podcast.
Yeah. So one of the things he talks about in his Rules for Life, which is a great book, recommend you guys read it. It gives the example of the lobster. So within the lobster animal kingdom, crustaceans, whatever. I'm not a zoologist, but essentially, with these lobsters, you have lobsters that pretty much squabble and grab all of the resources, well, most of them. So other lobsters will attempt to challenge in a duel with these head lobsters that get all the resources and get all the female lobsters. And every time that lobster loses, its brain chemistry literally changes to make it more submissive and essentially accept its defeat. And that's likened to in with us as people. There's been studies that have shown that individuals who are depressed, both emotionally and economically, have lower levels of serotonin than those who are not depressed and those who are doing well. Um, so we can see a direct correlation. That when you're a loser in society or economically, it can have a compounding effect that one has to try to fight themselves out of. So there's a lot of two really fascinating studies on epigenetics, which will be future episodes. But it also just talks about how your ancestral DNA, from what they've experienced and what they've gone through, can also manifest itself in future generations. So, with that being said,
So Mulan's real.
hashtag Disney. Um,
Separate video.
but I just think that it's something to be said that if you are someone watching this video who is a child of a single mom or is economically depressed, don't these numbers don't have to be your destiny. There's a million stories of individuals who grew up with single mothers who worked hard, grew up in rough neighborhoods, and then elevated themselves to success. You don't have to be a reflection of the environment around you. However, if you don't conscientiously think about that, then you could metaphorically be that lobster that Jordan Peterson references. Um, what are some thoughts or tips you have on overcoming, tough situations in life?
Well, specifically talking about depression, from my own experience with it, because I have dealt with depression myself. Uh, if you stay in a negative mindset for too long, it can compound almost to the point where it feels like your new normal. And to pull yourself out of that, it's a rather difficult task because a lot of the things that could help you are symptoms of depression. So it's kind of like having too much weight and you can't even stand. So yeah, some tips to get out of it, I would say, definitely don't isolate yourself. That you kind of feel maybe a little embarrassed, or not necessarily embarrassed, but um, maybe just disappointed in the person that you became. Maybe you had aspirations for a different version of life events, and you're currently living some sidetrack car that you didn't really intend on, and you have to pick up the pen and paper and rewrite your own story. Sometimes you have to alter your path from the original one, or maybe the original one just needs a different angle, and you can still jump back on your original goal for what you want to do in the next 5 years, your whole life. I mean, it really depends on what you're aspiring to do. I would say most of the goals that I feel are worth pursuing, that if you invest in them gradually over time, that they could really blossom into something nice, like practicing a few weeks, learning a new language. You don't need to aggressively try to become fluent within 2 months. Just a couple things every now and then. Study up, and maybe in 5 years you're fluent. But either way, I mean, you can have goals that stretch out across time, and then you're able to have more hobbies. And that goes back to what you were saying earlier: is that developing oneself. I really always point at people to get hobbies, because hobbies are usually the things that you're interested in doing regardless of if there's any pay involved. So going to an art class, you might even be paying for the art class just to have the experience of doing the hobby. I know myself that if I was a little more financially sound, I would be pursuing hobbies that I cannot currently. So that is a motivator for me to level up myself.
Yeah, I think those are all great tips from a psychological perspective, because you can develop PTSD and depression if you live in a neighborhood that has a lot of gun violence, gang activity. You're just seeing darkness and negativity all around you. And that's why for me, I'm sure some of you may have heard of the program Big Brothers, Big Sisters. I want to see more and more programs like that, and that is my personal goal, is to create, nonprofits that have positive mentors for kids in inner cities. Future episodes to come, but yeah. So, but from an economic, goal orientated standpoint, if you remember in episode one, one of my biggest takeaways is your vibe attracts your tribe. So, I think it's important that, if you are a single mother, obviously I would never be arrogant enough to say that I know what it's like to be a single mom. Obviously, I'm a male. I would never say that I understand what it's like to be a woman. That would be extremely arrogant and disrespectful. But just from a practical standpoint, um, especially if you have sons, positive male influences in their life would be huge. I know things are kind of iffy with COVID, but things like getting your kids in the martial arts, reaching out to, networking within your church or networking within your friend groups for, men who have, professional jobs, or firefighters or first responders or accountants, businessmen. Introducing your kids to individuals like that can help combat having that vibration of mimicking the guy on the corner who's selling drugs.
Sure, like I'd say, um, if given the option along with a supporting parent, um, I feel like more than half the time the kid is going to choose the greater side, if you will.
Right. Second, we can't ignore the fact of the amount of kids that grow up without a father who are living with their unmarried moms. When it comes to, excuse me, new life, it falls both on men and women. Again, this isn't to pick on women. Obviously, it takes two to tango, as they say. So, men are equally as responsible for these scenarios. So, number one, having these male role models will help, young boys understand the seriousness of what it means to bring a kid into the world. So, in hopes that they don't do it as a teenager. Or and if they do it, to be around and assist that mom so that kid isn't growing up, without a father. Number two, I know most of us, we either ourselves or our peers in high school, you hear stories of kids say, yeah, my parents never really talked to me about sex. I forget the exact percentage. I'm sure anybody can Google it, but the amount of kids who learn about sex first from porn, is a alarmingly high percentage. So with that being said, it's not a intellectually dishonest hypothesis to say that if you are learning about sex for the first time watching porn, you're also not going to make wise decisions about safe sex or even abstinence until you're at least out of high school. If we as a country were to lower that number, that alone would fix a lot of issues, having teenage pregnancies and women who are struggling trying to do everything on their own. And I think you know those two things alone will help. And us as millennials and Generation Z's, we are the leaders of the new generation. We are the new parents. So as we get older and get married and have children, teaching kids about sex, teaching kids about these issues that our parents thought were maybe too taboo to talk about will help fix this number. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so obviously, sex is a very important topic in everyone's lives, and if they're getting their information from porn, then it's going to be a distorted image. Um, Ideally, you want it to be kind of like a. You don't have to get too detailed with any of these things. You're just essentially giving them a general framework to know what it is, how they should interact with their partners, um, what is what are right ways about going with courtship, and which ones are disrespectful to someone's character, and um, trying to instill that in our young men. Definitely want them to, because most of the time they're leading the charge. I mean, they're setting the tone. If their parents instill in them that it is important to respect women and to be kind to them, uh, and I would say on the women's side, um, maybe a little bit less Cardi B. Maybe a little less TikTok. Uh, save some things for the creative mind.
It's funny because with me being a millennial, older millennial, I grew up listening to Lauryn Hill, and I think about the powerful messages she talked about, and then I think about now some of the female artists that are out there that are extremely explicit, and I know that many will say it's hypocritical because male artists have been um, explicit for the longest times, but typically we look at, in general, I would love to see men and women in the music industry make more positive songs for children to listen to, because it is easier for kids to access music nowadays. Like when we were kids, mainly me, I had to physically go to a place to buy a CD, or I'd have to illegally download it on LimeWire. Now kids, like you said, can go on TikTok, can go on Instagram, can go on YouTube, and they're seeing these different explicit images shown to them. Um, so yeah, I just feel like there's no sacredness anymore.
I agree. I feel like uh, sex should be celebrated, but it shouldn't be the center point of people's existence.
And that's the problem. And that's the problem with our society, right? Is we typically go from one extreme to the other. So, there's an interesting article in the Scientific American about couples who were part of very strict religious Christian backgrounds, and because they're taught sex is evil, sex is bad, it's disgusting. Then when they get married, they can cause inadequacies in the bedroom because they grew up with this subconscious bias that sex was evil. Um, so definitely we don't want to go back to that era. We definitely don't want to, go to the era where we're, making women wear dresses down to their ankles. Nobody's suggesting that. But at the same time, also, we don't want to get to the point where everything is hypersexualized and we live in a hypersexualized society, because that's not good either. We want our kids to be kids, as they get into their late teens and they're doing their own self-discovery. That's one thing, but, a 9, 10, 11-year-old girl watching WAP, I think most rational people can agree that that's not a good thing.
Sure. I'd say I had it too. What did you say before WAP? What was your reference?
Um,
Hypersexuality.
hypersexualized, and how when you're in your late adolescence, obviously at that point you can start to have self-discovery and figure out who you are as a person, but we don't want our 8, 9, and 10, 11-year-old girls watching WAP.
I'm not gonna go get it. Sometimes trains of thought die.
But yeah, so we talked about it a lot. So just kind of to summarize for our audience, the main point we were getting at is the fact that in the news you either hear that Hispanics and blacks live in extreme despair, and that's it. You're not given any other details. Or you're told that everything is okay. America's perfectly evil, racism is over, everything's peach. However, I hope that you understand from this that most things are centrist and not right or left, and that yes, there is a huge amount of wealth inequality that is caused by a lot of poor choices that our government has made. But at the same time, there's other details that there's devils in the details that help us to see that there are tangible, realistic things that we can do to help. So first, Rob, if you want to just quickly summarize if wealth inequality or your environment is making you physically depressed from a mental, emotional standpoint, just quickly summarize ways that you can be helped in that situation from a psychology perspective.
Yeah. So I would say to maybe look into a more try to shy away from materialism. You'd be really surprised if you didn't need that new thing that's coming out. How much money has just now freed up in your account? I understand that in our very fast technology-driven update, kind of new phone every year setup, that can be very draining on a person's bank account if they're working anything less than $20 an hour. And some of us are part-time because there aren't any full-time hours that include benefits. So going back to I'm awful.
So the what thing?
No, not that one. That was the. I can pull that one out later.
Okay.
But,
no pun intended.
specifically, the one you just asked me, how to deal with economic hardship. That's the.
Well, from a psychological perspective, how to deal with the depression that may be.
That's associated with it.
Exactly.
Not focusing on it as much. That's kind of what the point I was trying to make as, and I was giving an alternative to materialism that you could be more involved with experiencing life than gathering possessions in it.
So what you're saying is, if you're a young kid growing up in a poor neighborhood, instead of focusing so much on the fact that you don't have a lot or that you wish you could have more, try to tap into the experiences of life.
Yes.
Okay.
It's been shown that certain countries and cultures are more likely to say that they're happy, that they're enjoying their time here, and surprisingly, it's not very correlated to how much money they have. It's mostly mindset, and I can reference Brazil because that's kind of the one that's on my mind right now. They're not. I don't have the statistics in front of me, but last I checked, they are one of the fifth largest countries in the world.
Yeah, I know they have a large economy. They're part of.
I was just talking about size first.
Yeah.
Size, they're maybe like.
Yeah, they're definitely in the top 5. Yeah.
And then as far as economies, it's a very growing economy.
Yeah, they're part of BRIC.
Coronavirus probably didn't help anyone, So I'm sure every country is facing their own individual problems. But prior to COVID, I heard that in Brazil, even though they didn't really have a lot, if you were to average it out amongst all the households, they still report enjoying their time. I don't know if it's the sunshine, the beach, if it's the smiling faces that greet them in their community. But I do know that they have a lot of closeness to family, and that's kind of what I always like to go back to is the importance of having community, family members, very strong relationships with
Yeah,
friends.
yeah, we got to bring the family aspect of life back. Um, and then, some of the points I was highlighting was just not having that victim subordinate mentality. Go out there and fight. Go out there and work hard. Go out there and have goals, have dreams, have desires. It doesn't matter if you have one parent or two. It doesn't matter if you live in the east side of a neighborhood or in a suburban cul-de-sac. Every individual on this planet is here for a reason. And it's just up to you to determine if you know what that reason is. And I, talked about in the last video knowing what you're good at, analyzing your interpersonal relationships and in your hobbies, and then finding ways to put people around you, especially if you're a parent. Put your kids around successful people to help connect them and network with individuals who can help give them ideas or assist with the resources to get where they need to be. Um, and lastly, my humble opinion, we need to stop watching cable news networks. Um, because when we focus too much on data that doesn't tell us the whole story, we get angry. We start maybe supporting political initiatives or movements that are based off of emotions and not facts. And it distracts us. It really hurts us because our politicians, instead of just saying, increase minimum wage or force these initiatives, they could be helping, communities that are in despair to build them up, to build up structure within, to have more of a focus on education. So, my ultimate dream, with this channel, with these specific segment, is to get enough people to start looking at facts. We live in a society where emotion is used as a magic trick, if you will, to get people angry and to get people to point the finger. And we're headed toward a very, very dangerous cataclysm of events if people don't start unifying. And once we look at the facts, once we are able to have them, here I am, a black man, a white man, able to sit here in peace and have these sensitive conversations, because we're not looking at emotions, we're looking at facts. And when you look at facts, it then gives you the tools to be able to do something with it, get involved in your community, start looking for individuals, candidates that are actually fact driven, so we can change the setup that we're in now. Like I said, as millennials and Generation Z, we are the future leaders. We are the ones who will be picking up the torch, if you will, in this next decade. So it's up to us to start having facts and making informed decisions so we can have a better future.
Agreed.
So with that, thank you so much for watching episode 2 of Tea Time. Please like and subscribe. And as always, I want to make sure that I'm providing content you're interested in. So feel free to message in the comment section any topics that you want to see. Thanks. Goodbye.